And I will, and I'm going to start sharing my screen, all right? So, all right, I hope you can all see my screen. All right, great. So thank you all for joining. Once again, I would really appreciate it if you can turn your webcam on so that I get more of a feeling that I'm teaching a class. Um, okay, all right, great. So welcome, and we are now in week 14. Don don don. So how many weeks do we have this semester? Do we have any more holidays on Fridays this semester? Yes or no? Does anybody know? Um, is there another week that we have off on Fridays? Maybe not, right? So 14, 15, 16, 17. So perhaps then we have three more lectures. Somehow I was under the impression we might only have two more, but we might have three more then, okay? And on week 18 will be the final presentation of our projects. There's no exam, obviously. We're going to be doing final presentations. So I'll send out more instructions about that. But on week 18, we'll be doing a live demos of our projects and some presentation about what we did this semester. And I'll send out more details about what to prepare for that later on. Okay, so that'll be our week 18 schedule. Our and in the coming weeks, we are essentially entering the last phase of the last module, if you will, of our class, where we will be discussing authorization. So the remaining topics mainly revolve around authorization, though the last topic will be about front-end browser side policies, which is also to me related to authorization. So we're now in the authorization part of the class. We have talked about authentication to a certain degree, though we'll talk about a little bit more about it today. We've talked about confidentiality and data integrity. We've seen how to use cryptography to handle all these things. So the last remaining thing really is authorization, which is a big deal, and we'll start talking about that today. Okay. Let me see if there's any questions. And okay, okay, cool. Once again, if you have questions, do raise your hand. Even if you cannot use the microphone, raise your hand. And if I call on you and you can't speak, then I'll go check the chat window. So if you have a question, you can also write it in the chat window. But to let me know that you have a question, just use the raise hand feature so I know to read the chat window and so on. Okay. All right, cool. So let's get started. We're going to talk about token-based authorization today, and we're going to see it used in a couple of interesting ways. And I hope I hope there's something new for everybody. All right. So let's start with a topic that we have been leaving off for a while, which is let's go back to this registration business that we did, right? So last week we talked about registration, and the way we did registration was that we essentially just asked people to give us a username and password, and we just immediately just created that account for users. That's not really a very realistic registration process because we didn't verify if this email is even correct. We just took whoever asked us to register them on good faith. All right. So today we want to kind of talk about how do we ensure that the person who's registering is really the person who's registering. Okay. So generally, what happens when you go to a website and try to register? Uh, can I ask somebody like, what is the process you generally go through when you kind of are registering for a website? Any volunteer? You don't have to be correct, just have to give me a basic idea of what you typically go through. Anybody? Anybody? Riley, go ahead. Awesome. Great. So thank you. All right, great. So that's sometimes called single sign-on, where you use another website's credentials to log into the website that you're interested in, right? Okay. So cool. So we got a few things to talk about registration. One is certainly that when we register, at the very least, we need to make sure that the um, email address that they're providing us is authentic. So we may send off an email to say, is this really you? Please verify that this is your email address before we really let them create the final account. The other approach is to use single sign-on. So we say, just sign on using your Google account, your Facebook account, and we will let Google or Facebook or whoever it is do the verification that you are the right person and this is really your account. So we could uh, defer the verification part to another authority. We will try to take a look at both of these this semester, but for this week, we'll focus first on the email part. Perhaps next week or so, we will look at single sign-on, meaning allowing people to sign on with the credentials of a different website. So let a different website authenticate that account, right? So let's take a look at a kind of a schematic here. So on the slide, I show a basic idea of the moving parts. So we have a user on the left, okay? We have the browser window here. Hold on, let me open up my screen pointer so I can use my little screen pointer here. So we have this browser, all right? And we have the email that is gotten back. So the user has to interact with two different applications, actually. They have to interact with the website and they have to interact with their email client as well. So they have two things to interact with. So what typically happens, we don't know. We go to a website, we register. Of course, the website sends the registration request back to the web application. Out of curiosity, who sends you the email? Is it the web application sends you the email, or does the web application ask the web API to send you the email? Hmm, let's think about that for a second. Who is sending me this email? The web application or the web API? Let's say in our architecture, for example, who should send the email? Hmm, the confirmation email. Let's take a little poll. Use the raise hand button to raise your hand if you think the API sends the email. All right, we have a couple of votes, few votes, more votes, several votes. Okay, interesting. Okay, okay. So that's quite a few hands. Um, Now I'm gonna lower your hands. Oh, okay. We still have more hands coming up. Okay. Raise your hand if you think the web application should send you the email. All right, cool. We have a few more people saying the web application. All right. Okay. So there's no competition. Most people are thinking the web API sends it. Okay, fine. What's the difference? Does it really matter who sends the email? There could be a couple of positives. There could be a couple of negatives of doing it either way, and we'll discuss that in a moment. Okay, I got some more questions though. When somebody asks to register an account, right? They enter some initial information. They say, I want this is my username, or maybe they provide an email address and things like that. When do we actually make the account in the database? Should we make it before they verify their email, or should we make it after they've verified their email? Let's take a vote. How many of you feel like we should make the email account, not the email, we should register and actually create the account in the database before they have verified the email? So how many of you, just use raise hands, how many of you think before we have verified the email, we can already create the account? All right. Okay, we got a few, we got a several. All right, great. Most of you feel like, yeah, once they tell us the username and email address, we can start making the account already, right? So that's no problem. Okay, great. Let me take a vote for How many of you think we should rather just wait until they have verified their email and everything is done, and then we make the account? Two people? Three? Four? Okay, so the major votes seem to be let's make it before we make the let's make the account. Let's make the account in the database before they've verified their email. Okay, fine. Well, uh, most of you felt let's make the account before they make their before they verify their email, and that's fine because they've already provided us almost all the information we need to make the account, right? Like a username, email, password. So why wait? All right. Well, then, for all of you who said, and that's a lot of you, almost all of you, except for four people, for all of you who said, let's make the account before we have verified the email, I've got a question for you. What should we do if they never verify their email? Like we sent them the confirmation, but they never confirmed it. What should we do? Do we have any volunteers? Well, raise your hand. I mean, you can take a guess. Don't have to be right or wrong. Okay, Yenyu, go ahead. You can do that, but 5 minutes, maybe I just registered and then I had to like go run to the bathroom and like, I thought, hey, I'll make a cup of coffee before I come back. That's 5 minutes. And I come back and it's gone. I have to really budget my bathroom time now, okay? Yeah. Like do your business and get out. Don't sit around and okay. So 5 minute, 10 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week. These are all good questions, and it's a little hard to kind of figure out how we're going to uh, how we're going to possibly deal with people who just never make their accounts. Okay, sure. One potential thing is that we could just make the account, and if they've never verified, we could like sweep back once a day, or once an hour, or once every few hours, and say, "Oh, okay, we'll go delete their accounts. We don't need them anymore." But you can see it starts getting a little complicated because there are multiple things that could happen, right, in this meantime. So they may also click the link to verify their email. They come back, but maybe there's another step we need. We don't know. It gets a little complicated. What happens? And what would happen if we sent them their we sent them this verification email and somebody steals it? I don't know, somebody hacks into their email or they accidentally forward the email to somebody and somebody else clicks on it. How do you make sure the right person is actually clicking on it? These questions all get really complicated, okay? So registration is not quite that straightforward as it might seem, even though the experience you've had has been pretty smooth. There's quite a few questions you've got to ask behind the scenes, all right? So let's start asking these questions. And I'll just tell you right now, there's multiple ways, and all the combinations of what we have talked about so far are all doable. You just have to pick one and do it. Okay. So, for example, my first question was, so somebody registers, who sends the email? You could do either. The web application could send it, or the web API could send it. Okay. One problem potentially with the web application sending it is, what if the user is not coming in through a web application? What if they're coming in through a mobile app? I mean, let's imagine we've added a mobile app to our architecture. Well, the mobile app, will your mobile send the email? Like, who will send the email? Will your mobile contact the web application to send it? That's weird because the mobile should be just talking to the API. So it gets a little complicated as you add more moving parts to it. All right. My preference would be, and again, you can send it either ways. Your mobile app could send the email, your web application could send the email, but I think the simplest solution is to have the web API send it. So that way, no matter what client you're using, there's always one person who's sending it, and that's the web API. Okay, so that would be my preference. That would be my vote, is in terms of who sends the email, the web API sends it. Um, when do we store the accounts to the database? I think most of you voted for as soon as they give us any information, let's just make the account, send the email, and then we'll wait for them to verify it. But until they verify it, we need to have a flag in the database, like in the accounts table, saying, is it verified or is it not verified? So we would have to kind of adjust our database so that the database can know whether this account is verified or not verified. So that adds a layer of complication. And on top of that, if they never verify their email, I've got to decide like, when do I cancel this? When do I delete this account? And I've got to set up some kind of background worker, like some kind of side process that's running asynchronously and deleting accounts when they're no longer verified. It gets complicated. Okay, so my vote would actually be, let's not make any account until we have all the information from the user and we have verified their email as well. All right. And that way, if they never verify it, no problem. We never made an account anyway. So that would be my vote. That would be the simple votes, okay? And I'll show you my way of doing it. You are welcome to use any approach you want for your system application, but think through all the ramifications, all the things that could happen, all right? So this is gonna be my approach, and it looks very complicated on the screen, but I'm going to tell you, this is probably the easiest approach. All right. So let me kind of take you through my story of how I'm doing registration for my application. And I suggest you follow this way unless you have a strong reason to do it a different way, in which case that's totally fine. But if you do it a different way, I'm going to be looking to make sure you've thought of all the possibilities. I'm not even sure I've thought of all the possibilities. So here's the way I'm going to be doing registration this semester, okay? And this is registration using the website, using username, email, password, credentials, not single sign-on through Facebook or GitHub. I'll talk about that another week, all right? So here's my approach, and there's three parts, there's three steps, there's three parts to this approach. So let me kind of go through them one by one, okay? So when a user, so this is our wonderful, mythical, amazing, magical user. So when the user wants to register, they have to provide us with a username and email. Notice I'm not asking for a password because I'm not going to make an account for them yet until I know exactly who they are, okay? So in my system, I don't even ask for a password yet. I just say, what's your username and email, all right? They provide me the username and email through the browser, and that comes to my web application. Here's what's going to happen. My web application will create a special token, all right? So I'm using this word token. What is a token? A token, think of it like a little bit of cryptographic information. It's going to create this little bit of cryptographic information, and that token is actually going to be the username and email essentially encrypted. All right, I'm going to encrypt the username and email combination, and that'll give me like, and I'm going to make like this base 64 string out of it. And that's going to be my token. That's going to be a little bit of information that I can now pass around throughout my system. So I'm going to encrypt their username and email and make a token out of it. All right. And then I'm going to pass that token to the web API. So I'm following this. What color is this? This orange stream, step one. All right. So user provides me username and email. My web application creates a token and passes it to my web API. My web API cannot read the token because it's actually created by my web application, and only my web application can really read that token. All right. So my web API doesn't do anything with that token. Instead, what the web API does is it creates an email and it embeds the token into the email. All right. Where does it embed it? You probably know. You may have a guess, but we'll see later. And then the web API sends an email out to the user. Well, the web API is actually not an email client or server, so I'm going to use an outside service. I'm going to use a third-party service. This semester, I'm going to use a service called Mailgun right here, okay? And what Mailgun essentially does is that Mailgun sends out emails for me, all right? So I'm going to ask Mailgun, can you please send a confirmation email to the user? And that confirmation email will contain the registration token, all right? And so that goes to the user's email client. The user has to come in, and somewhere in that email will be a link saying, please confirm, and the user has to click that link. that link will have the registration token built into it. And that link will take them through the browser to a special page, a registration confirmation page in my web application. So now we are kind of, so the browser basically asks the web application, could you please register me? And the token comes through the email link. The email link that they click on will have the registration token in it. The web application will now open up that registration token. Remember, the web application made that token, so you can open it up and say, I know who this is. This is the username and email because it was encrypted by the web application. So the web application now knows the username and email, and it knows that this email is valid because the link has come through the email. And the web application says, okay, now provide me a password. I've got your username, I've got your email, I just need your password. And now the user, step 3, has to provide the password, okay? And the web application now asks the web API, hey, I've got a username, email, and password. Could you please create the account for me? And now the web API essentially creates the accounts, all right? So this is my 3-step process at registering a user. And it involves this little magic trick of having a registration token. Let me walk you through what it looks like, okay? And then I will, should I walk you through how it looks like, or should we do it step by step? Before I walk you through what it looks like or do it step by step, are there any questions on what we're doing? So I see some things in the chat window, but raise your hand if you have a question. Yeah, go ahead. All right. Well, okay, great question, Riley. As you're going to see, the API doesn't have to read the token. The token is just made into part of the email. All right. So all the web API does, it doesn't encrypt the token. Excuse me, it doesn't decrypt the token. It just takes a token that it cannot read and puts it into the email. All right. And the token is put into the link of the email and returned to the web application through the link. All right. So that's how it's going to happen. So it's actually the web application who makes the token and who ultimately gets it back through the email link. All right. So that's essentially the way we're going to be doing this. Got it? Cool. So any other questions? Please raise your hand if you have a question, because otherwise I have to sit and read all the chat window, which takes time, and I don't know if there are questions. Any other questions? Okay. All right, cool. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you step by step through this. And rather than demoing it all right now, I'm going to try to demo it as I'm executing this, okay? I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it, but let's take a look, all right? Okay, so let's start. The user wants to make an account. Let's do that. So let me quickly get my web API and my web application running. Okay. So that's my. By the way, can I if I lower that? If I lower that, does it kill it? No, it doesn't. Okay, good. So then rake run dev. All right. Great. So my API and my application are now running. Let me make it a little bit smaller. All right. So let's go to my application. Localhost 9292, and I should be here. Fantastic. And I can log in as before, but this time I'm going to use this registration feature, okay? So let me try to register. The first thing it does is ask me, what's your username and email? So I'm going to say, well, what's the account you want to create? So I'm going to say, I want to create the account Somia, And my email address is Somya. Hey, look, I know my email. It knows my email address. My email address is somya.ray@gmail.com. Don't abuse it, okay? It's my personal email account. Okay. And then I click register. And what happens? Oh, it just takes me back to the homepage and it says, please check your email for a verification link. Let's see what's happened in the meantime, okay? The verification link will come to my email account and I'll let you know when it arrives, okay? So it's already arrived. Let me show it to you. All right. So this is the verification link. All right. A verification email. Let me just make it a little bit smaller. Excuse me. This is my verification email, and it says Credence app registration received. All right, so it's sent to me from the Credence application, and it says, please click here to validate your email. You'll be asked to set a password to activate your account, and here's the email address. Here's the email. When I hover over it, you notice that the link is to localhost 9292, which is my web application, and /auth/register. Okay, so I'm going to the auth register route, and then after /auth/register, you're going to see that there is a very big and ugly token like R75K, blah, 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 blah. There's some big token in there. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. So when I, through my browser, gave my username and email, what happened? I clicked register. That went to my web application's auth/registered route with a post request. So I posted the form to my web application. And what my web application essentially did is it ran a service object within my web application called verify registration. And here's my verify registration service object. And I'm using in my web application the same library I created last week called secure message. Remember, I used that to encrypt my sessions. Well, I'm going to use that again. I'm just going to ask secure message, could you please encrypt the registration data? The registration data is simply the form with the username and email. So basically, take the username and email as a JSON object and just encrypt that, and that becomes my registration token. All right, that becomes this not so pleasant looking token inside inside that link that was in my email. So like inside that link, that if I'm patient, then that token that you're seeing in there is created by my web application. All right, and what am I doing? I'm creating that registration token, and then I'm sending that token with an HTTP post request. I'm sending that token to my web API. All right, and I'm sending it to my web API's auth/register route. Same route as my web application, but it's of course to my web API, to API v1 auth/register with a post. And how am I sending it? I'm actually sending it in a hash with the key verification URL. And what I'm basically putting in that URL is my web application's URL /auth/register with the registration token at the end of that URL. So essentially, I'm telling my API, could you please handle this registration confirmation process? And what I'm providing it is the URL, this entire URL. I'm providing it that entire URL right here, okay? And that URL has my token in it. Okay, I have not sent an email to the user yet. In fact, the web application won't do it. The web API will do it. So I'm simply telling the web API, here is the verification link that you need to get the user to click on through an email, and let the API take care of it, okay? Any questions on this so far? Are you okay with it? All right, cool. So I'm seeing some head nods, so that's good. let's move to see what the web API does now. Okay, so the web application has posted this verification link to the web API. Let's see what the web API, and the link has the registration token built into it. Okay, let's move on to see what the web API does. So now we go to the web API. Now I'm talking about the web API. Okay, so you notice in my slides, if I'm talking about the web application, then I have it colored in and the API is like, whited out. So now I'm going to talk about the web API. So I'm not talking about the web application. So that's whited, that's kind of whited out. And I'm talking about the web API. The web API basically gets this URL, which has a token built into it. So what does it do with it? So the request comes in to API v1 auth/register. It's a post request. So here's my controller for that in the web API. All right. And what the web API does is it receives that URL and it passes it on to its own verify registration service object in the web API. So here's the web API's verify registration service object. And this service object is the one that's actually now going to contact Mailgun, this external email provider, and ask it to send this email to the user. All right. So let's see, what does verify registration do? It does a few things. I've removed a little bit of the code to make this kind of a little bit easier. So essentially, this is what it does. The call method is here. I've kind of simplified it a little bit. You can look at my actual GitHub code later on when I push it up there. It calls this method called send email verification. All right. And send email verification essentially contacts Mailgun. It contacts this email provider called Mailgun. How do I have this? How do I talk to Mailgun? I'll tell you a little bit more about setting up this Mailgun service provider in a moment. All right. And actually, let me tell you right now. Essentially, my web API on Heroku, on my web API, I told Heroku, please, under resources, remember I've already got a database set up, a Postgres database. This time I'm asking it, can you please add the Mailgun service to my web API, okay? And what Heroku does is it just simply contacts Mailgun, creates an account with Mailgun, and Mailgun passes back all the environment variables that you need now to talk to Mailgun, all right? The other way is you could just go to Mailgun and create an account by yourself, all right? But I'm doing it through Heroku because the nice thing is if you do it through Heroku, then Heroku will, all you've got to do is add the Mailgun service, just like you added the database, you add the Mailgun service. This time I'm just suggesting you do it through the Heroku interface. And Mailgun provides you a very basic starter service, all right? And it's free, okay? It provides you a starter service for free. And essentially with the starter service, you can send 400 emails per day. That's not a whole lot, but it's good enough for a startup, okay? Like you, a very small company. So 400 per day for free, all right? And if you want more, then you got to start paying money, all right? At which point I can suggest you other services which are probably cheaper. But anyway, for 400 for free, you can start using Mailgun, all right? And once you've registered Mailgun, if you click on the Mailgun link in your dashboard for Heroku, it will send you to a Mailgun dashboard where you can see your usage of Mailgun, how many messages are going out, did any of them fail, did any of them bounce, et cetera, et cetera. It'll give you a whole dashboard to manage all the emails that are getting sent out, okay? The other thing Mailgun does is through Heroku, it provides you a Mailgun API key and a Mailgun domain, and you need those things, okay? So what I would do is I would copy those off of Heroku and add it to your secrets.yaml for development and testing purposes. For production purposes, it's already set by Mailgun for you on Heroku, okay? So let's go back to my web API and let's assume I've already set up Mailgun, okay? So you'll notice that I've got a little method in here called mail key and mail domain. All they do is that they read the Mailgun API key and the Mailgun domain from the environment variables, all right, which is now in my secrets.yaml. All right. How am I sending out this email? What's going on? How am I authenticating myself with Mailgun? Um, so essentially, what I need to do is I need to create an email. So I've got a little method here called HTML email, in which I'm writing some HTML code, which basically is the HTML code for this email right here. All right. I also have another method called text email, which I've not shown here, which creates the same thing, but in a text format for people who may not have an HTML email client for any reason, okay? Some people with, let's say, visual disabilities, they don't like HTML email, so I've got a text version also that I send out. You can read my code to see how I'm doing that, okay? And you'll notice inside my email account, I'm saying click here, and the link I'm providing it is the verification URL with the token built in that came from my web application. So I'm building it into the email body that I'm going to send to the user. All right. And here is me contacting Mailgun. All right. So I'm going to use HTTP to post a request to the mail URL. The mail URL is a URL. I've cut it off. It's like there's a little bit more to the URL, but the important part is here. It's essentially I'm emailing API mailgun.net. This is Mailgun's API, and I'm sending a post request to Mailgun's API. All right, and as part of the URL, I'm telling it, v3. So it's their API. I'm contacting the version 3 of their API. And I'm putting into the URL the domain, a special kind of identifier. It's like a username of my application, all right? So of my Heroku application. That's called my Mailgun domain. So I'm just passing that in as part of the URL, all right? But there's more. So that's me. I'm posting to that URL. All right. And I'm posting to that URL and I'm sending a whole bunch of information through a form request. This is not a JSON request. This is a form request. It looks almost like it's coming from a browser, basically. All right. So this is a HTTP form request. And the form request has this this structure. It says from you can make any email address that you want. You don't have to actually make that email address. You can use anything you want. So I've just written no reply, so saying don't reply to me. I'm not checking there. To the email that the user has provided me, okay? And all right. And with this subject, all right? And essentially that's it. I'm just kind of contacting Mailgun and saying, can you send this email out with all this information? And this is the HTML email. That's this method right here. I have another text email for a un-HTML version of this email as well. Okay. So I essentially just send a post request to Mailgun's API saying, could you please send this email out for me? And part of that email is that verification URL, which has the registration token built into it. All right. Any questions on this so far? There's one part I haven't told you. How does Mailgun know who my web application is? Like, where's my credentials as the web application? Like, where's my API key or something to identify, hi, I'm a Heroku web application and I'm registered to use Mailgun, all right? My web API has to authenticate itself with Mailgun because Mailgun is not going to take requests from anybody. You got to have an account, okay? Here's how I'm how I'm authenticating myself with Mailgun. There's two things I'm doing, both of which I think are highly risky, but this is Mailgun's API, not my API, so I've got to follow their system. When I'm taking requests later for my web application, I'll do something a little bit better than what they are doing, I think, okay? So Mailgun asks that you use a basic authentication. The keyword here is basic, a basic authentication HTTP request. So this HTTP request I'm making to Mailgun, I've got to follow a protocol called basic authentication. And basic authentication is this. When I send this post request to Mailgun, right? I'm sending an HTTP post request. In the request, I've got to have a header called authorization. Literally, it's got to be a header called authorization. And in that authorization header, I've got to have the word basic to tell it this is a kind of basic authentication that I'm doing. And then I literally put in the credentials, my API key and username into this header. So I'm doing that with the HTTP gem. I create that header using this auth method. And I tell it, please create an authorization header for me. And it's basic. And here is what you've got. Here's the credentials you've got to send it. Mail auth is a function I've got up here. And all it really does is it takes my credentials, which is a username. The username is going to be API and password. The password is actually the mail key. It's the Mailgun API key. I'm taking, and basically you can see what I'm doing is I'm taking API colon. The colon separates the username from the password. The password is the API key. So I'm taking username and password, API colon, the Mailgun API key, and I'm just base 64 encoding it. I'm not encrypting it. I'm just base 64 encoding it and putting it into this authorization header. All right. So that is built into my request to Mailgun. All right. Also, I'm doing one more thing in the URL that I'm posting to at Mailgun. I've got that same API colon API key in the URL as well. Okay. This is called basic authentication, where you just send your username and password to an API in a header. All right. This is not very secure for a couple of reasons. One is it's unencrypted. Anyone who is able to, for any reason, intercept this HTTP request and can read it, can read my Mailgun username and password and API key. That's really unideal, but that's the protocol that Mailgun is asking me to follow. All right. And it's a technique that a lot of APIs use, unfortunately, and it's called basic authentication. All right. Any questions about how I'm contacting Mailgun, how I'm authenticating myself with Mailgun, or the email that I'm asking Mailgun to create? Mailgun will, by the way, send out now this email to the user for me. All right. And that's how I end up with this email. Any questions on what you've seen so far? Let's just take a little break and see if there's any questions. Yeah, Rona, go ahead. Which credentials? Right. Yes, right. So notice when Rona's talking about credentials, she's talking about the Mailgun credentials, my API's credentials to talk to Mailgun, not the user's username and email. That's right. Is that right, Rona? Okay. The email, my user who's trying to register, their credentials, username and email is safe because that's built into this token. All right, it's encrypted. So nobody will see that. However, if somebody can intercept my request to Mailgun, they can see my Mailgun API key in the request. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rona. That is a problem. The only security that I have, and it is pretty good security, I suppose, is that my request to Mailgun is an HTTPS request. Okay, so the body of the request should be encrypted. All right. However, there is a slight issue here in that it's possible that the Mailgun service, if they're logging their requests or something crashes, it's possible my API key could get leaked in the logs or something like that. Okay. Or if in any other way, this HTTP, if there's a very sophisticated actor, maybe like some government intelligence service that managed to hack into HTTPS, they could probably read those credentials. Okay. So it's not really bulletproof. If somebody can break into this HTTPS connection, or if Mailgun caches it somewhere, or something like this anywhere in the process, it's not a very safe way to do this. You're right, Rona, and that's why this is called basic authentication. All right, this authentication I'm doing between my web API and Mailgun, it's called basic authentication. It's not that great. Okay. Later on, I'm going to make requests from my web application to my API, and I'm going to ask my web application to authenticate itself with the API. And I'll show you a better way of doing this, okay? But I can't control Mailgun's API. That's what they want me to do. All right? Great. Any other questions? Yeah, there's one more question. Please go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. Um, right. Yes. So Joe's question is, these credentials, which includes my Mailgun API key, the Mailgun version 3 API asks that I put it into my URL. So you see, it's kind of strange. I put the credentials at API. This is sometimes called user credentials, and you can put that right into the URL. So it's asking me that I put it right into the URL, and that I also pass it through the through the authorization header. Yes. So their API suggests to do it this way. Okay. There is another version also of their API which is a little bit different, but I couldn't get that. That's an older version. This is the V3 version, and this is what they're asking me to do. Okay, so it's not ideal, but this is what they're asking. And honestly, Joe, I could have found another email provider which has a more sophisticated authorized authentication scheme. But part of the reason I chose Mailgun is to show you what basic authentication looks like. All right. It typically looks like this. At the minimum, you've got to pass your credentials in, base64 encoded, not encrypted, base64 encoded in the authorization header. But sometimes you're also asked to pass it in um, as a user credentials in the URL itself. Okay. This is why it's called basic. It's not really that great. All right. Okay, so it's part of a demonstration as well. All right, great. By the way, Heroku also has integrations with other email providers. So if you really want to, you could pick a different email provider. I used to use SendGrid before, and they're great. They provide like 12,000 emails per month. You can do that. I had a little bit of problem with the integration, so I didn't use SendGrid this semester. I used Mailgun. Okay, all right, cool. So this is how I'm sending the email to the user through Mailgun. And you notice my web API did not try to decrypt this registration token. It doesn't need to, it doesn't want to, and it cannot. It's not even able to. All right. It simply puts that token as, which is part of the verification URL. It just sends that as a link in the email to the user. Are we good with this? Great. So then I'll move on. So next step. So I talked about how to do Mailgun. So now the email has come to my user. So let's see, let's move on. So let me click on this email and click on this link and see what happens next. So I click on it, all right, and it opens up my app, and it says, oh, look, it says your username and email is this, which I provided it before. That's interesting. It knows my username and email. And it says, please provide me a new password to use now. Okay. So now I type in my password. You'll never guess my password. It's so secret. Okay. And then I submit my password. Okay. And once I submit my password, my web application says, fantastic, your account has been created. Please log in. All right. Now I can log in with that username and that new password and the username I had before. And welcome back, Soumya. It now knows who I am. I can go see my accounts. I don't have any projects, however, yet. All right. All right. So let me take you through this part of the experience. What happens when the user clicks on this email link? Like, what exactly happens? So when they click on this email link, they're basically clicking on that verification URL. And that verification URL, all right, goes to my auth register. If I go back here, if you can, it's very small, but you can see it goes to auth/register of my web application, not API, of my web application. So it goes to auth/register. Okay. By the way, why is the email link sending me to my web application and not to the API? It's my choice that the user should only ever interface with the web application, not with the API. Okay, that's just my choice. So I send them to /auth/register with the token at the end of that URL. All right, with the registration token at the end of the URL. So what happens when the application gets this link? Notice now the web application which created that registration token, finally that registration token is back at that same web application. All right. So the web application gets its registration token back. And what does it do with the registration token? I am now using my secure message library, which I use to encrypt the token and make the token. I'm using it to decrypt the token now. Okay. Once I decrypt the token, I will have the user's email, username and email back. All right. And I'm doing a couple of things. And one thing is I'm sending them to this verify registration window. Okay. And I know the user's username and email. Sorry, it's a little different than what I just created. It's Ray instead of Soumya, but fine. I know the username and email because I just got it back from the registration token. All right. Notice I did not have to make an account in the database. And I don't need to read a database for this whole process. That's fantastic. All the information I needed was actually being passed around from the web application to API to Mailgun to email back to web application. I didn't have to store it anywhere. That's great. All right. So from the registration token, I got the username and email and asked them to create new passwords. So once they create that new password and hit submit, that submit posts their information to my web application. All right. And it posts the form. So it posts to /account with the registration token and also with the password in the form of this post. So from the form, I get the password and I make sure that the password is the same as the confirmation password, the confirmation password. I make sure the two passwords are the same. I once again decrypt the token to get the account information. And then I use my service object called create account, which is the service object that I created last week, which essentially calls my API and says, could you please create an account for me now with this username, this email, and this password? And now my web API, and I wrote this code last week, creates this account for me. Okay. That's the entire process of creating a user account. So notice nothing gets written to the database until the web application has confirmed that this email is valid and has come back with a registration link. All right. So Riley, go ahead, ask your question. Excellent question. So Rao is asking, well, I sent an email to the user. When can the email click on this link? Like today, tomorrow, next week? Like how long does it live? For today's simple purposes, there's no expiration on this token because it's just a token with a username and email. Okay, so technically the user could click on it anytime they wish. All right. Of course, the token has a username and email embedded in it, so they can only use it once ever. Like once they've used it and actually made the account, they can never create. I mean, that email link with the token is only valid for that account. So they can't make new accounts with it. They can only make one account out of it. Okay. So, but there's no expiration yet because I wanted to keep the story very simple. I'll talk about expiration and tokens in the second half of today's lecture. Okay, so thank you for that question. That's a segue to another topic. All right, and I'll do it with a different token, not with a registration token, but you'll see the logic and you can implement expirations on the registration token using the same technique. All right, great, good question. Any other questions? I know there's some stuff in the chat window, but please raise your hand if you have a question you'd like me to read in the chat window. I'll take a second to read the chat window anyway. Okay, how long is it? Okay. All right. Yenu, who was this? No, that was Raleigh still with this question. Okay. All right, cool. Edgar notes that it's actually common practice for a lot of sites to create the account before verification. And there's usually a flag in the account database saying, is this verified or is not verified? You're totally right, Edgar, but I don't want to go that way because it's going to create more complications for me. I've got to create like a background worker that like once an hour or once a day, or I don't know when, checks the database to see which accounts have not been registered, have not been verified. When did I send them the email? Has the, how much time has gone by? I don't want to deal with all that stuff. So I'm doing it the lazy way. And it's not just a lazy way. In many ways, I think it's a smart way. I think in some ways, it's smarter not to create anything in the database until I am sure of all the details of this user. And I've verified they're a real user, okay? Because I think it's kind of weird if somebody's created temporary accounts in the database, all right? For example, somebody could come and create an account with edgar@gmail.com. And now that's kind of weird because, and let's say it's somebody else, not Edgar, it's Eve, our hacker, right? And the reason she's done that is she's just parking that email, right? So now she's got an entry in the database with edgar@gmail.com. She's not going to verify the email because she doesn't have access to the email, okay? But it's in my database. Now, what happens when Edgar comes tomorrow and says, hey, I would like to make an account. My email is edgar@gmail. Do I tell Edgar, sorry, you cannot make an email because somebody else was trying to make an account with this email? Or do I say, somebody else was trying to make an account, but you know what, I'll just ignore that and delete that account and I'll make a new one for you. Like both ways seem a little suspicious to me, like something weird. Like if your logic is not perfectly straight, there could be some kind of hacker workaround there because I've created this entity in my database with Edgar's email in there. So to me, it's a little uncomfortable to make something in my database that I'm not really fully confident about. Okay, so that's another reason why I am choosing this semester in my project to not make anything in the database until everything is verified. All right. All right, cool. Any other questions? No? All right. Okay. I have any weakness that anybody sees? Any kind of like security weakness anybody sees in my system so far? Any loophole you can think of countering? Please tell me before we go public, before I deploy this in Heroku. All right. Actually, there is a weakness that nobody has mentioned. And I'll tell you what that weakness is right now. So remember, once the web application gets the registration token back and is confident with everything, it now sends a request to my web API saying, here's the username, email, and password, please make an account, right? Nobody asked me, how does the web API know that this is a legitimate request? Like, what if somebody else sends a post request to my API and says, hey, please make an account with this username, email, and password? How does the API know this is a genuine request from the web application that belongs to this system? What's stopping anybody from just sending a request to my web API saying, hey, I've verified everything, just make this username, email, and password account for me? Brandon, go ahead. All right, so there is some stuff we can do through the HTTP protocol itself, which is to kind of say, hey, these two folks can talk to each other, okay? But that gets a little complicated for multiple reasons. What if, um, what if it's not a web application, it's a mobile app? What if my web application is scaled and I have like 10 versions of the web application? All right. Using HTTP is one approach, but I'll discuss next week what I think is a little bit more of a solid approach, potentially, or maybe it's related to kind of doing this. All right. So hold off for me, hold on for like 1 or 2 more weeks, and I'll come back to this issue of how does the API trust the web application? Right? The web application is making like dangerous requests, like create an account. It can also make the request delete the account. All right. So how do I kind of deal with these kind of requests? So hold off for me for this week. This request from my web application to the API to make the user to make the account is a dangerous request, and it hasn't tried to authenticate itself with the API and to say, listen, I'm your friend. You should trust me. Right now, it's that last leg to make the account is dangerous. Okay, so I'll say that much for now, right? And I'll keep it that way until in a future week. Any questions or any other questions or comments on the registration process? You're all okay with this? Okay. So essentially, this is what happens. And you'll notice at the end, once the user account is created, I don't automatically log the user in. That is something you could do. But I choose to actually send the user back to the login window. So I think my redirect at the end here is back to the login window and ask the user, okay, fine, now log in like you were doing it for the first time. Okay. So that's the essential process that is there. Yenu, go ahead. Yanu, you just raised your hand. Okay. Mm. What I was saying is that I think this is what I think this is the part. Okay, so hold on. Okay, so I think this is the part that was raising some confusion. That Edgar@gmail.com, that was part of a discussion about why don't I create the account before I have verified the email. And my response to that is, if I create an account with Edgar username, email is edgar@gmail.com, and I can create a flag on that account table saying not yet verified. Okay, but what if nobody verifies that email, and then tomorrow the real Edgar comes and tries to make another account with edgar@gmail.com? Now what do I do? Do I tell Edgar, hey, I'm sorry, you can't make another account because I already sent you a verification email. You should go check that. Or should I delete the old account that I created and tell Edgar, okay, fine, I'm going to delete that account and I'm going to make a new one for you. Okay. And what happens if the first person who was trying to make the account was also Edgar, and he goes back and clicks that earlier email one time? It'll get very confusing. Like, what if Edgar gets two registration verification emails? Like the first time he did it, but then he forgot to click the link, and the second time he does it and he gets another email. Like, what do I do with these two emails? Like, which one do I trust? So to me, creating the account in the database before verifying everything is very risky because it opens up multiple people being able to come in and create like temporary accounts in the database and create a lot of complication for me in the future. So I kind of like this approach of keeping the information embedded in the token. And as long as a token is going around and somebody has a token, it's fine. And once the final verification happens, it's when the web application reads the token and says, now I have all the information, just give me the password and I'll make the account for you. Okay. So Yanu, that was my discussion about Edgar and Gmails and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. 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 Great. All right. Cool. So this is the registration process. I'll let you look at the code once I upload it to GitHub, and you can kind of follow through and see if it makes sense. But this is the first demonstration um, of token-based authorization. And essentially here, I'm using a registration token to ensure that the person who's trying to make the account is really the person who has this email address. Okay. And I'm not just trusting them because they clicked a link and came to my website. I'm trusting them because they can give me back the token that I gave for this user. All right. So essentially, my application is trusting itself. My web application is trusting itself and saying, if you can give me the token that I generated, then I'll believe you. All right. So it's kind of it's a trust that's based on tokens. All right. Cool. Okay. If there's no more questions, if there are more questions, please write it in the chat window. But we're going to take a little break now, and I'm going to make it a nice 10-minute break so that you can go use the restroom, eat some food, get a snack, um, and come back. And I will start again a little after 10:20. Okay, so like around so try to be back here like by about 10:23 or so, 10:22, 10:23. And I'll also get back in the meantime, and hopefully we can begin class after that. Okay, I'm going to stop streaming, and I'll start a new stream once we